My name is Michael Morris. This is my home email address. I'll give you my home address because I'm not sure where I'm going to be next year. If you want to text me, that's my cell phone, and that's my extension number here. Year 1 environmentals already know me. Those who don't know me, you soon will. I'm going to talk about, since this is a conservation issues and perspectives class, and you've been given a book that's for one person's perspective, which you probably don't know. It's quite an opinionated book. You probably don't realise because opinions happen to coincide with your own. But if this was written by someone else other than Alice, like Federated Farmers, for instance, you'd have a very different workbook. I'm also going to give you my view. It's not a popular view, and it's probably one that will engender quite a lot of emotion. So I'm going to start with a scene from Macbeth.
We may no more reports, let them fly, or till then wood remove to dancing lane. I cannot take to fear. Is the boy? No. Was he not born of woman? The spirits that know all mortal consequences have pronounced me thus. Fear not, Macbeth. No man that's born of woman shall I have power upon thee. Then fly, false things, and mingle with the English epicures. The devil damn thee black, thou cream-faced loon. What got'st thou that goose look?
There is 10,000
Geese? Huh?
soldiers, sir.
That face, and never regret thy fear. And the delivered boy. What soldiers? Hatch. What soldiers, wave face?
The English force, so please you.
Take your place, Hatch. Second.
So how does Macbeth react to news that he doesn't like? Right. So some of those insults are probably a bit archaic, but at the time it would be pretty strong language. So I'm going to start by presentation. For those of you who don't know where to find it, you look on the iDrive. And then it's under environmental. And it's under Michael Environmental 2010, so it's the same as the Year 1 environmentals. And it's under CIP for 2010. And I'm going to start with a point on veganism, and then we're going to have a break up to about 10 o'clock, and then the other topic I've got is going to be on wastewater. So you can follow that in the notes if you want, because the notes follow the PowerPoint just as they do in the workbook. But before I start, I'll go through the notes. So, at the front, I've just put some readings and the learning outcomes. So the learning outcomes are in addition to what you'd find in your workbook, because they're for this one only. And I've got some readings. The readings are not part of the course material, so you won't be examined on them, but I put them there to both establish my credibility and to back up what I say. Because one thing we're also supposed to do, we ask you to do here is when you're writing reports to put your references in. So we expect no less from ourselves. So first of all, the scene from Macbeth shows the way we react to news we don't like. And I get that quite a lot. People react to news they don't like by shooting the messenger, or assaulting the messenger, or insulting the messenger. And another example, Macbeth's fiction, this is a factual one. Rachel Carson published Silent Spring in 1962. I don't know whether you've come across Silent Spring, but it was one of the first books critical of the chemical industry. The way that the chemical industry in the United States was indiscriminately spraying pretty much everywhere. If it didn't like some flowers or weeds at the side of the road, it would just spray them. The way to manage crops was spray them. Integrated pest management hadn't been heard of. Biological control, hardly used. If you have a problem, spray it. And Rachel Carson published Silent Spring in response to this. And she mentioned the way that sprays were affecting wildlife. Birds, bees, fish. Sound familiar? Things haven't changed that much in 40 years. And when she published it, the industry reacted by personal attacks. They didn't bother to use her science, probably because they couldn't. Her science was sound. Rachel Carson was a good biologist. So what they did is they reacted personally to her. She wasn't married, so she was a lesbian. She was dying of cancer herself, so therefore she just had this thing about cancer. She was a neurotic lesbian spinster, right? And therefore, by implication, wrong. Fast forward 44 years, 2006. Food and Agriculture Organisation published Livestock's Long Shadow. This was the Food and Agriculture Organisation, if you don't know, is part of the United Nations. It's an international organisation. It's not a lefty, greedy, hippie, lesbian organisation. It's quite a respected organisation. And it came to the conclusion that livestock was depleting the environment much faster than anything else, including transport. And here is Federated Farmers' intelligent, measured and scientific response. It must be written by a vegan. And therefore, again, just as in Rachel's case, the implication wrong. So, 1962, it was the lesbians. 2008, it's the vegans. Vegans and lesbians of 2000s. Now it's just about compulsory to be a lesbian. They can't use that one, so they use something else. So vegans are like lesbians used to be, neurotic, embittered, spinsters, hippies, probably homosexual, or at least latent homosexual, man-hating, everybody hating, and skinny, and everything else. Of course, none of them get a PhD in zoology from UT Top University. What's causing environmental degradation? Another saying, as well as not shooting the messenger, is the elephant in the room. The idea is that people are looking for something to blame or looking for something that's wrong, and they look everywhere, but they don't see the elephant that's right in the middle of the room. And environmental degradation is being blamed on population, too many people, too few people, transport, too many cars, too many different types of cars, SUVs, not enough roads, too many roads, roads in the wrong place, industrial growth, not enough industrial growth, capitalism, global capitalism, greedy capitalism, not enough capitalism, the wrong sort of capitalism, or the lack of capitalism, communism. The Russians were particularly bad at resource management during the era of communism, and also lack of communism, that if we were all more communistic, we'd be a lot better off. Government corruption, God's wrath, etc., etc. What about our SAD diet? So the SAD is actually an acronym, and it's Standard American Diet. It's being used for the standard diet in the United States. And in case we like to get holier now and anti-American, New Zealand is catching up with the United States on obesity, as well as incarceration rates and a lot of other things. First thing we need to think about is Ecology 101. You probably learned this in sixth form. Every step up the food chain, the amount of resources you need go up by about a factor of 10. So if you have a certain number of kilojoules of energy coming from the sun going into plants, okay, the plants will use a certain amount of that energy, a certain amount is wasted. The plants can't use it. About a tenth is the general ballpark figure given is used by the plants. And then those plants are eaten. Well, most of the energy that goes into the plants is going to grow other plants, to grow seeds. Some of it's wasted in excretion. Some of it is wasted in digestion of the animals. They can't use it, the woody parts of the plants. So about a tenth of that energy from the plants goes to the animal. And then the animal's eaten by another animal. And most of the energy that goes into making the animal goes into things that aren't eaten, like the bones and the skin. Other parts are used by the animal for respiration, excretion, running away from predators, etc., etc. So only about a tenth of the energy from that animal goes into the next perfect layer. So you can see that if we're eating lower on the food chain, we're using about a tenth as many resources as if we're eating higher up. And that's not rocket science, that's sixth form ecology. So passing food through a cow before eating it is very inefficient, just generally. And if we can, we should be using it directly. And again, it's if we can. There are certain places in the world where it's probably not possible, such as the Far North. But I don't see any iceberg down here. Some of the effects of livestock in general. One of them is global warming. Now, I don't know if any of you see An Inconvenient Truth. But Al Gore gave a lot of very dire predictions, some of them probably exaggerated, about what's going to happen if we continue our industrial capitalistic society based on the motor car and on continuous production. But absent in his book was any mention of the livestock industry. Again, because we like the elephant in the room. But according to the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and the Ministry for the Environment now, it's on their website, New Zealand, 50% of global warming in New Zealand is caused by agriculture. And that's more than transport. Now, most of you probably think of global warming as carbon dioxide, but there's also methane, which is has a lot more greenhouse damaging effect than carbon dioxide, though on the other hand it does break down to carbon dioxide. And then there's also nitrous oxide, which has even more. Methane comes from cow burps, not farts. Now country to popular mythology. So the so-called fart tax would actually better be called a burp levy. But nitrous oxide from animal waste. Some of you have done the nitrogen cycle with me in year 1, and you'll know that you get nitrogen from the atmosphere. Goes to ammonia, goes to nitrate in the soil, and then when it is denitrified, it goes back to nitrogen. But one of the products of denitrification is nitrous oxide, and that's actually a very powerful greenhouse gas. And the more literally shit you put on the soil, the more nitrous oxide you're going to get. And that is one of the more powerful greenhouse gases responsible for global warming.
Michael,
Yeah.
can you turn the figures down there?
Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear it so much from here. Yeah, pigeons have been called rats with wings. Or cows go with ticks. It's a black locust, they eat everything and they leave waste behind. This is from a study by 2 United States researchers from the University of Chicago, Eshel and Martin, who published the Earth Interactions in 2006, and I've got it in your handout. You might have heard that a vegan in an SUV is causing about as much greenhouse gas as a meat eater on a bicycle. That's not quite true. But what is true, if you look at this one here, is if you get none of your, this is the percentage of calorific input from animal sources. So nobody exists solely on meat, but if you've got a red meat diet, you're probably getting about 50% of your calories from simply just from meat. And the mean US diet is up here. You're getting 50% of your calories from meat and you're using the sort of mean US diet, then this is the amount of equivalent of tons of CO2. And a carbon equivalent means that you convert your methane and your nitrous oxide into carbon dioxide equivalents. So methane's uses a lot more, absorbs a lot more VS heat than carbon dioxide, but it's put into carbon dioxide equivalents. So if you don't, none of your calorific input from animal sources, you're down here. I mean, you're still using some, it's above 0. But if you're having a red meat diet, and fairly typical American red meat diet, then it's like, and the difference between the red meat diet and the vegan diet is like the difference between an SUV and a Prius.
What's the typical red meat diet?
Well,
meat at every meal or dinner or?
This is the mean US, so this is the like not your southern rednecks, but your standard Americans. And this is mostly US, but it's probably similar for New Zealand.
Well, I'm not quite sure what that is. I'm from the US, but I don't really eat a lot of red meat.
But then you might
I'm not quite
also,
sure what the typical US diet is.
I don't know what the typical US diet is, but I think the typical New Zealand diet, as far as I can see, is meat pretty much every meal. If you're mostly eating poultry, it's actually a lot lower because chicken is actually more efficient than red meat as far as global warming goes. If you have the sort of average US diet, it's the difference between an SUV and a Camry. I'm not really a car freak, so I don't know what a Camry is. I think it's a white Toyota, but not quite as good as it appears. So the conclusion was that a vegan SUV has the same effect as a red-blooded American or Kiwi, so that's the sort of very red-blooded type in a Prius. So water use is another one. And water is very much a topical issue in New Zealand at the moment, following what's happening in Canterbury. But the Canterbury Regional Authority was actually put under statutory management by the government because they were under a lot of pressure, farmers wanting a lot of water, and locals saying, no, we don't want all the water extracted. And they were caught between two powerful groups of people. In the end, the government put them under statutory management and said that farmers have got to have all the water they need. And Federated Farmers' response is that any body of water that's moving and not being used to irrigate farms is wasted. Now, there's a group called Save the Malvern Hills in Canterbury that wants to prevent them flooding a whole section of the Canterbury Plains under statutory management, which they will be allowed to do if they have special legislation, simply in order to keep more and more dairy farms going. So yeah, water is a live issue in New Zealand. It's not a renewable resource, not in the quantities we're using it. Just some pictures here of these sort of huge irrigation machines used for dairy farming. This is from David Hamilton, who's the EBOC professor of environmental management at Waikato University. And his chair was set up in order to manage the lakes in Rotorua. There's a new professorship also being set up in marine studies just recently. I think it's starting next year. Yeah, just some pictures of the irrigators. This is from an Australian study, and Australia, of course, water is even more precious than it is here. But this is studies of livestock pasture, grains and colours and water used by the irrigators. So if you're using livestock then you're using 8.795 million megalitres. A megalitre is similar to an Olympic-sized swimming pool, or probably similar to this pool here. This pool here would be deeper than a swimming Olympic pool, but also less long. Cotton's quite thirsty, uses quite a lot of water, but not as much as livestock pasture. Rice uses less, which is interesting, because rice actually grows in water. Down to sugar, fruit, grapes, and other vegetables. So, livestock uses a lot of water. It also makes a lot of money, but if you look at the return money per megalitre of water used, then vegetables and fruit actually don't get more.
So the government's given these kind of statistics, but they still don't.
All these are available pretty much everywhere. The Ministry for the Environment now and sufficient environmental footprint even after that diet. The Stern report, which was by Lord Stern, who's not exactly a radical hippie, he's a member of the House of Lords in Britain, said that it gave an economic report on global warming and said it would actually be better if everyone became vegetarian. The United Nations Food and Agriculture report, they're all available, they're all on the internet. It's just that, most people don't go around looking at government reports about things that are fun. We like to go to McDonald's instead, and therefore like to persuade ourselves that everything's all right. Some comparisons have been made. Jared Diamond wrote a book called Collapse recently, which became a bestseller. I think he has a very bleak view of humanity, but some of the things he said do make sense. And he looks at Easter Island. And Easter Island, when it was rediscovered in about the 18th century, were a few poor natives struggling to survive on the beaches. But Easter Island used to have quite a great civilization, and it built these huge statues. But they let their land get destroyed, and it's now a very bleak sort of area with no trees on. And I'm just comparing it here to the Canterbury Plains, because the Canterbury Plains does not have any native forest on it, apart from a small bit of reserve in Christchurch. It's all gone to make cows. And here are some of our monuments. So just a picture from a tourist brochure of Canterbury Plains. All very nice, but you can see it's all exotic until you get to the mountains. That's the sort of nice English pastoral scene that my ancestors would have liked. There's habitat destruction. This picture from the Amazon basin, soybean production. And some people ask about soybeans. They say, well, you eat soybeans, aren't you contributing to the destruction? The thing is, again, it comes down to the 10% rule. If you eat soybeans directly, you're probably eating about a tenth as much as if you pass your soybeans to a cow before eating them. And it's not soybeans for tofu guzzlers and that's causing this destruction. It's soybeans for cows that are going to McDonald's. Probably not in New Zealand, but in America, but in the Americas. Things are starting that way in New Zealand. We pride ourselves that our cows still grown on grass, but we're now importing palm kernel oil from overseas, from Borneo, threatening the habitat of the orangutans. But orangutans are cute and they're like us, so people like to protect them, but their other habitat destruction is just as bad. This is from the Education Institute in Brazil. This is different states in Brazil and the different numbers of cattle they've got, and there's a correlation here between the accumulated amount of deforestation and the cattle herd size. So if you plot the cattle herd size on one axis, you plot the deforestation on the other, you can draw a line. And when you do statistics, I'm not sure if you've done it this year, you realise that there is a correlation, a statistical correlation, meaning that one goes up as the other goes up. And this is the same in New Zealand, in fact. There's a book by Jeff Park called Uruguay, and that's available in the library. It's, a lot of it's about the way New Zealand was when the European had just come here. So there's a lot of Maori politics in it, which I can't follow. But what I could follow quite well was the way that the lowland kahikatea forests in New Zealand had been gradually cleared for cattle farming. And lowland kahikatea forests, for example, near Horowhenua, between Wellington and Palmerston North. The Hauraki Plains, which you'll drive through when you go to your Auckland field trip between Tauranga and Auckland. And the Firth of Thames, and plus a few places on the South Island, which I'm not so familiar with. West Coast is one of them. But here's the Hauraki Plains and the way it is now. And 200 years ago, when my ancestors were first coming here, that would have been lowland swamp forest, kahikatea forest. It's now farmland, and as you can see, this is a photo from Environment Waikato during my class.
Is this that place right outside of Kairoa?
Kairoa, Ngatia, and around that area. Yeah, you will drive through it, so you can have a look. So, some facts. These come from the New Zealand Parliamentary Commission for the Environment report. Land clearance for farms is a leading cause of sediment build-up and coral reef destruction as well. So you've probably done coral reefs in your marine studies course, and you've learned about the problems of global warming and bleaching of coral reefs. A lot of coral reef destruction is from land sediments because they're quite fragile ecosystems, and especially places like Madagascar where there are farms up in the interior. which bringing sediments down into the river. Land clearance for meat is the leading cause of Amazonian deforestation. Almost all of New Zealand's lowland capital deer forest is gone. I'm not sure, I think there's a few patches left on the west coast. When we preserve our national parks, we tend to preserve the ones that are unproductive for farmland. I don't know if there's many national parks. Even now, the government is trying to mine the ones that we've got there. And New Zealand's a biodiversity hotspot, and that came out of a study in Nature in 2000, where scientists looked at two characteristics of different countries: the number of endemic species and the potential for habitat destruction. And they call those environmental hotspots because they're areas that are worth saving and yet won't be saved unless we do something. And New Zealand was one of those. New Zealand's got a high number of endemic species, you probably know that already. It's also got a high level of habitat destruction. Another one is Madagascar and the Amazon basin, but you expect those. At the moment, the import of palm kernel is contributing to rainforest destruction in Borneo. Now, I reviewed a paper recently in the Journal of Agricultural Ethics on cattle production in the United States. And they're using there a lot of genetically modified cattle to produce more milk. And one thing that was interesting is that a lot of agriculturists there are saying that grass-fed cattle just do not produce enough milk. And I thought that was interesting because in New Zealand we are still producing grass-fed cattle. But if we're starting to think that they just don't produce enough milk, and enough milk for what? We're already trading them down the drain. Obviously enough milk for farmers' profits. Then what that must mean is that we're going to be intensifying as well. And you can actually see that happening with the proposals in the Mackenzie country. I don't know if you've been following that, but last year a group of 7 companies put in a resource consent for a huge cattle feedlot operation. And that was called in by the Minister because it's considered national importance. I don't know if you've done the resource management act, you will next year. Year 1 environment students have. And the Minister was going to have a look at it, but then the applicants pulled out. They said it was too expensive. And they'd already had a resource consent for land use from the District Council. And then in the end, that was challenged in the High Court by the Environmental Defence Society, and they didn't get their consent for that either. But they're trying again. They've got a lot of money, and they're going to keep trying until they're successful. Probably, maybe even more important than global warming, Nick Smith, National Party Minister, hardly a hippie greenie, has said that water pollution is probably the worst thing in New Zealand, the worst environmental disaster after global warming. So they're not global warming deniers. You recognise this. This is the Waimaku stream just next to the Polytech. People who've been in Tauranga in the 70s told me they used to swim there and have picnics. Now that has got a permanent health warning. It has got higher levels of E. coli than the same water standard. It's on pretty much permanent red alert. And some of the environment students actually did some studies there and had a look at the E. coli levels. I've also had a few Year 3 students with their project of their E. coli levels and nitrogen levels right the way up the stream. Now, the E. coli levels gradually get worse as you get downstream. So it's a non-point source. It's coming from farmland. There are dairy farms up the stream, there are lifestyle blocks up the stream. They're not fencing. Cows are being able to get into the water, cow effluents getting into the water. And it's affecting our health and our recreation. Yeah, that's the permanent health warnings there. That's been there the 4 years I've been at Polytechnic, it's never come down. So some figures, this is from Environment Waikato reports, is that 90% of Waikato streams are too polluted to swim in. So they're like the Waimaku stream. Farming in the Waikato contributes more to stream pollution than the Hamilton and Ngārawahia sewage works. Now the sewage works go into the Waikato River eventually, but it's treated. And those of you who went to the sewage works last year would know what a lot of work goes into treating sewage. It's a high-tech job. There are qualified engineers working on that at the primary treatment, secondary treatment, tertiary treatment, backups in case anything goes wrong, pumping stations, oxidation ponds, always examining the bacteria in the ponds, flocculation, sedimentation, coagulation, everything goes into treating sewage to make it safe. But animal sewage is not treated. And a piggery of 16,000 pigs can produce as much untreated sewage as a city of 23,000. The way that piggery sewage is often treated is it's just sprayed onto the land. And that does give it some treatment because it filters through the land and denitrifies, but it pretty much washes into the waterway. And these people who are doing it are not trained sewage engineers. So, two examples. A couple of years ago, Reed's Piggery in Carterton, and they operate under the Premier Bacon range, with pictures of nice pastoral countryside, not of polluted rivers. And the Cuckoo Beach Road Piggery, and that's the one that appeared on the Michael King documentary last year and this year, and 3 years and 5 years ago, and it still hasn't done anything about it. They've been convicted under the Resource Management Act for pumping what's essentially raw sewage into the rivers. Now, Kay was fined, I think, $30,000, and Reed was fined, I think, $15,000, so it's a slap on the hand. But it costs more than that to prosecute. Some other facts about what our livestock industry is doing is the fertiliser supply. Not that long ago, farmers used to get most of their fertiliser from the grass or by putting clover on it, and clover being a nitrogen fixer. It's got nodules in the roots that fix nitrogen in the atmosphere. But now we bring in fertiliser from overseas, which is disrupting the nitrogen cycle. And according to the State of Environment report, nitrogen use has more than doubled in the last 10 years, and phosphorus use has gone up a lot too. And nitrogen and phosphorus get into the rivers, and they cause algal blooms, eutrophication. But another aspect of fertilisers is where does it come from? At the moment, a lot of our fertiliser comes through the port of Tauranga into balanced fertiliser works from the Western Sahara. And the Western Sahara is in disputed territory. A lot of countries don't actually recognise it. And it was annexed by Morocco. So there's an issue with indigenous people's rights as well. Before that, it used to come from Nauru. Nauru is a lump of bird shit in the middle of the Pacific, and that's mostly pure phosphate fertiliser. But then that was all scraped away until you expose the bare rock underneath, which these are called pinnacles, which is underneath all the guano. And now Nauru has none of it left. And Nauru is forced to become a jailer for Australia in order to make it a bit of income. So it wasn't sustainable growth, it wasn't sustainable at all. And as a result, fisheries around Nauru, due to all the fertiliser wash-off, are pretty much ruined. So they can't make anything from fishing either. So New Zealand fertiliser use has doubled in the last 10 years. Most of it finds its way into the streams, well it would do because of gravity. Everything finds its way into the streams eventually because the streams are lower down the hills and the law of gravity being what it is, that's where they go. Nauru's fishery has been totally destroyed, and phosphate at the moment comes from disputed territory. Something else that happened is the New Zealand government were actually forced to pay compensation to Nauru for exploiting their fertiliser industry. Australia and New Zealand both deals with that. Nauru was an Australian colony at one stage. Right. So we're looking at global warming, water pollution, and habitat destruction. The other thing is other human rights issues. Livestock agriculture at the moment can't feed the world. This is the reference to this one from the 1997 issue of Environment. And it's 1990 figures, so they're slightly out of date. The world population then was 5.3 billion, it's now about 7 billion. But this is what they worked out, a population that could be fed if everybody shared the dietary preferences in food of. So USA was 2.3 billion, so you couldn't feed very many people if everyone lived like an American. We You could feed slightly more then if everyone looked like a New Zealander, but as I said, New Zealand is pretty much catching up to the United States. Europe is slightly better, Japan quite a lot better. Bangladesh is probably, Japan, everyone could have been fed at that stage, if everyone lived like the Japanese, and especially Bangladeshis. But certainly not if we live like New Zealand or even Europe. Health is another one that eating healthy food prevents adult onset diabetes, kidney stones, breast, prostate and pancreatic cancer, but I'm going to pass briefly over this because this is mostly about the environment. I'm only mentioning the health part because people say that we need meat for our health. We probably need meat in the same way we need cigarettes for our health. Other health things, there are some 90 million broiler chickens in New Zealand, and antibiotics are imported literally by the truckload. We have a look at the Food Safety Authority who publish the reports on the number of antibiotics being used every year. Again, that's available on the website. And again, most people spend their evenings looking at government statistics. But they're imported by truckload to prevent these very sick individuals from dying before we're ready to kill them. Obviously, you're going to pack 14,000 chickens into a small space. It's probably like packing the entire Polytechnic into this room. About 3,000 people. Obviously, you're all going to get very sick, so you're going to need antibiotics in your feed. Now, the industry say that they don't use antibiotics as a response to sickness, they only use them prophylactically. Sorry, they don't use them prophylactically, they only use them in response to sickness. What people used to do is feed antibiotics to cattle, to chickens, to pigs, even when they weren't sick. The reason being it actually makes them grow faster. And the reason for that is that you and I, and every animal species on the planet, are continually fighting bacteria in our bodies. And most of the time we beat them. But it's taking energy. Our white blood cells have to work overtime for that. And that energy could be used to create fat and meat and profit. So if you feed the animals antibiotics, they'll actually grow faster and they'll grow more meat because they're not using their energy fighting diseases. That's now no longer allowed in New Zealand because of antibiotic resistance. So what the industry is saying is that we only use antibiotics because of diseases. But what they neglect to say is that, of course, the way they're rearing the chickens, they're going to get diseases. So they have to be continuously given antibiotics. So they are still using antibiotics prophylactically. And prophylactically means, well, it's like a prophylactic, it's for safety. So you're using it to prevent disease. Other health issues, the source of the swine flu epidemic has been traced to a factory in piggery in Mexico by Smithfields. I actually suggested that the Smithfields executive should have been arrested and charged with mass murder, but nothing happened. But swine flu has been spread throughout the world. It's become, I don't know how many people died from it, but it's quite long. I used to work in Parliament, and I used to get the bird flu epidemic reports in from various places around the world because I was preparing reports for the Health Committee in Parliament. And all of those started in factory farms. The government would like us to believe that it's all these birds flying around and dropping their food everywhere that are to blame, but this again is scapegoating, some death type stuff. And it actually makes sense because, Public Health 101, what causes flu? Unhealthy conditions and parent. Animal welfare, I'm just going to do a few pictures here. I think everybody knows about the animal welfare issues involved with factory farms in particular. This is layer hens. This is a genuine for real farm in Torrirua. This has now been closed down, but only after it's been operating for about 10 years or more. This is a more modern farm, so it doesn't have the white cages like the last one. It's still got all the hens in cages here. This is from the Open Rescue Coalition. I know who that person is. This is broiler chickens, and there's actually a difference between the hens that are used